my years of early motherhood, I started to recognize that actually I wasn't able to do the things that I wanted to do, the things that I needed to do to be able to be the best doctor I could be, the best mother I could be, and all the other things that, make us a whole person.
Yeah.
And I started to recognize that actually there might be something that isn't allowing me to be the healthiest I could be, or, mentally or physically. I am somebody who now suffers with an invisible disability. It's changed my life in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I've had to really modify the way I think, the way I work, and the way I live my life in order to accommodate living healthily, essentially. Having an invisible illness is really challenging because also you have to keep proving to people that there is something that you need support with.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune in to what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your own terms. But before we dive in, I have a quick favour to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and it helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared on this podcast is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support. Amrita, welcome to the podcast. It is great to have you on. Could you please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do, what you're doing now? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my name is Amrita. By background, I'm a GP. My work has really moved into the positive psychology realm. So my master's was in positive psychology. So I now support people to live better, healthier lives through supporting behaviour change and mindset. So yeah, I do that in a number of ways. I'm a coach and as I said, I'm a wellbeing consultant. So I work with a lot of corporate organisations and high performing professionals.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So we're going to address invisible illnesses. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit about that and how that has impacted you? Because I think it's something a lot of people don't address. Looking at you now, that thought wouldn't even come into my mind that you would have an invisible illness. Mm-hmm. And some people, that also means invisible disability as well. Could you talk about that and explain what that means for you?
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's a very beautifully open question. And the reason I say that is because, essentially I could go anywhere with it. But I suppose giving a bit of a background, when I grew up, when I was going through medical school, when I was, doing my first degree, and throughout a lot of my professional life, I was, inverted commas, a well person. I was very lucky. I was very fortunate with my health, and I was very fortunate to be able to do all the things that I wanted to do. So whatever I needed to do or wanted to do, physically and mentally, I was able to do that. And that's a real luxury, actually, that I think when is taken away from you, you realise what a privilege that is. And I think we take good health for granted. Into my years of early motherhood, I started to recognise that actually I wasn't able to do the things that I wanted to do, the things that I needed to do to be able to be the best doctor I could be, the best mother I could be, and all the other things that make us a whole person. Yeah. And I started to recognise that actually there might be something that isn't allowing me to be the healthiest I could be, or mentally or physically, and both. And so, yeah, it was a really challenging position to be in, going from a position where you're a fit and well and healthy person into recognising that actually there are things that you can't do. And the words that I'm using sound very simple, but actually the experience of not being able to do certain things and of being unwell and of being a patient when you yourself are a doctor is quite a humbling one. And so, yes, evidently, I am somebody who now suffers with an invisible disability. It's changed my life in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I've had to really modify the way I think, the way I work, and the way I live my life in order to accommodate living healthily, essentially.
Yeah. I think it's really important to highlight this because, again, in the workplace, it can cause a huge problem because a lot of workplaces don't really support these kinds of things. So can you talk a bit about that? Because I know you were working as a GP, and the impact of your illness had a huge impact on your work as well.
Absolutely.
And a lot of other things as well, including mental health.
Thank you. So I suppose I would like to just kind of say that it didn't affect my work in the sense of the work that I was producing.
Yeah.
It affected my desire to be at work. It affected the way people saw me, and it affected the way I was treated. So I was very able to do my work because I was prioritizing, there were other things in my life that I was minimizing in order to make sure that I was fully functional at work, and I was doing, a service to my patients in the way that I had always done.
Yeah.
But it was the way I was perceived. And obviously, as I've mentioned, I couldn't do all the things that I wanted to do. So there were things that maybe fell to the wayside, such as my ability to be as sociable, should we say, at work, or my ability to be as fast-paced with my admin, for example, my need for taking 5 minutes away from the screen, because actually that will cause me to, feel really tired. And I think when you're not working in the same way as other people, especially in general practice, actually it's noticeable. And it's not, general practice is a very rigid and fixed system, and it doesn't allow for difference. And when you are a little bit different, or you need to work in a different way, attention is drawn to you. And that can lead to quite bad behavior towards you. People don't understand you. People don't necessarily want to understand you. They don't have time to understand you. And that can mean that actually there's a huge cultural shift. There's a lot of tribalism. You're not part of our group because you don't do the things that we do or the way we need you to do them. And that can be really damaging and detrimental to one's psychological and emotional health, and therefore that leaks into one's mental health as well. All because your physical health isn't able to sustain your previous way of being.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really complicated, complex web, essentially, that's spun through one seemingly simple change, or one seemingly, small change that might occur in somebody. So having an invisible illness is really challenging, because also you have to keep proving to people that there is something that you need support with. It's that onus on a person to prove to others that you're not lying, that you're not exaggerating, that you're not trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. And that is exhausting, because I had previously been, speaking from my own personal experience, a very trusted person, a very reliable person, somebody who people would go to if they themselves had problems. And because I was, essentially telling people that I wasn't very well, but I looked okay, much like you've said to me in the introduction, there was this huge incongruency in their mind as to, well, actually, how can you say that you're so unwell if you look perfectly fine? And that's understandable. That's completely understandable. But I think when you know somebody and you know the person they are, when people still don't understand that, that's when it becomes very challenging.
Are you able to kind of talk a little bit about what exactly transpired with your illness and how that actually affected and impacted your mental health, and also the way you worked and the way you were perceived at work as well? And then I kind of want to move on to talking about the GP practice, because a lot of people, we had this very brief discussion, a lot of people don't actually know the way GP practices work. And I think it's quite important to understand, because, people like me, we go to the GP and you just see, a GP practice as it is. And I have a certain assumption about my GP practice, something I didn't really see it as a business. I just saw it as a place where I'm going to be cared for more than anything.
Okay. So yes, after I So when I was in the early stages of motherhood, should we say, I recognised that I wasn't able to do the things that I wanted to do. I got very, very tired. I needed to sleep more often. I needed to do more to feel replenished. And I think that the biggest difference that I recognised was after, say, a sleepless night that we all have with children, I needed a lot longer to recover. And I didn't quite feel like I was able to do all the things that everybody else was doing when they were playing with their babies at sensory group and all those types of things. And I recognised that there was something different, and I sought attention, I sought medical help. And it took a few years, because of the condition that I have, it took a few years to get a proper diagnosis for many reasons. But I was diagnosed with a condition called temporal lobe epilepsy.
How did that impact you at the GP surgery, and what measures were taken to accommodate you and make you feel like you actually wanted to be there and continue with your work, because you were fully able to do your work, but perhaps just in a slightly different way?
Yeah. The fact that as a GP, as a primary care clinician, I work in an environment where there are small businesses, essentially. And so that's where the challenge for somebody like me occurs, where I might need a bit of time away from my computer screen, much like we've been talking about today, that screen fatigue. I might need longer appointment slots. I might need to have a bit more of a break. So those types of things are challenging for smaller businesses to manage, essentially.
So I suppose each GP surgery will be very different from
absolutely
from one another, because they're running differently depending on the practice manager or the owner of that GP.
Well, the partners, absolutely.
The partners,
And the culture and I suppose the demographic of the population, how busy the practice is, the number of patients, where in the country that the practice is situated. That there are so many different complexities, but I can only speak of my story and the impact that my experiences had on my story and my professional journey are specific to the location in which I live. And then it'll be different for everybody else.
So I guess that each GP surgery is kind of contracted out.
So services are contracted. NHS services are supplied by the GPs who have a contract.
So can you talk a bit about psychology side of things that you're involved in? Because I think it's a real area of interest. A lot of people are trying to change the way they're doing things, change their habits. And someone like me gets quite frustrated when I'm really trying to make an effort to change something and I can't quite do it.
It's been a really exciting journey, actually. So just before the pandemic, I decided that I wanted to try and branch out and do something a bit different with my career, which I suppose was born out of my challenges with my health. And so I wanted to find a way of being the healthiest version that I could be of me. And I wanted to make sure that I was also providing that for my family as well, because I had 2 young children at the time, and it was important for me to be able to be present with them, fully present. So I started to do a lot of research in areas that I hadn't necessarily been exposed to. And that's when I came across and stumbled across, this landscape of positive psychology. And it's opened me up to so many different ways of thinking, of ways of being, and of learning, essentially, with a really open heart. So positive psychology essentially is the science of optimal living, science of optimal happiness, science of optimal being, whatever it is, how you can be the best that you can be, essentially. And learning about this allowed me to understand about what happened to me, actually. And I recognised that I'd experienced this concept called post-traumatic growth. And that's essentially where you have an adversity. Something might have happened. You might have had some kind of therapy or support system or way of facilitating growth out of that situation, essentially. And it means that following a challenge, you have a renewed purpose in life, a new appreciation of life, greater connections with people. So your relationships are far more meaningful,
Yeah.
not necessarily greater in number, but the depth of them. You know, you're open to new ideas and you have a greater grounding in spirituality. And that doesn't necessarily mean in religious spirituality, but just in terms of one's connection with nature. And I recognised that I had actually gone through this process, and it was something that was really important to me to share with others, because around that time of doing my master's as well, COVID struck. And there was a lot of turmoil, as we understand, tragedy and significant stress in our environments. And I wanted to be able to use what I had learned to support others. And so really, a lot of my work now, to be honest, most of my work is born out of wanting to support people move through trauma and move through life challenges. And I do that using this concept of post-traumatic growth, essentially. So I coach people who are going through life transitions or any kind of, challenge in their life at the moment. I do a lot of corporate wellbeing packages and supporting people to change their mindset and behavior, and really recognize that we are individuals, and we need to use our own experiences, cultural background and expectations in our process of moving forward. Because I think quite often people want to move forward, which is important, but you have to address the past and the present in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's like sticking a plaster on a wound. If you don't heal from beneath, actually, you're not going to be doing any service to any benefit to yourself. And so it's around how we recognise our patterns and the things that might have tripped us up in the past to allow us to use them to motivate our growth forward.
I think that's fantastic because, like you said, everyone is an individual, and we often look at whether it's social media or something on TV or in the newspaper, and, it's this quick fix or some way of doing something. And we're just kind of think, okay, because maybe perhaps out of desperation, you just start copying it. But you're not looking at whether that's actually going to work for you. And, my life is completely different. My past and present is completely different to yours. We might share certain similarities, but it's going to be vastly different. And when you start looking at yourself as an individual and working from there onwards, I think that's potentially how you can make the changes that you need to make.
100%. And I kind of think of us as being many, many different pieces of a jigsaw. So, the Shreya that's sitting in front of me is, made up of so many beautiful little tiny pieces that I don't know much about. We have a limited understanding of what's on the surface of each other. And so the work that I take pride in is giving people a space to understand what those pieces are, where they've been derived from, and how they fit into the current picture. We're so used to working towards goals that might not be serving us. We have a framework in our mind of, when I'm this old, I want to have this, I want to do this is my goal, I really want to achieve this. And somewhere along the line, that goal is interrupted by life. And when it's interrupted by life, we don't necessarily have the skills or the tools or the understanding to be able to move forward from it in a productive, proactive way. And so I really work around supporting people challenge their mindsets and try to minimize the rigidity within them, because I think, especially culturally, if you don't mind me maybe drawing some parallels, from a South Asian culture, some of the mindsets might be particularly rigid or fixed or don't allow much maneuver from a particularly linear path. And so I try to support people in challenging that. Not necessarily doing something about it, but at least challenging the thought process around why we do particular things and why we think the way we think. And I have to say, my late father told me so many of these little pearls of wisdom, and I was in my early 20s when he passed away, and so at that point in my journey, they didn't make much sense to me. But I keep hearing his voice, telling me, these little pearls of wisdom, and they make so much sense. One thing that really hits me hard is recognizing that he used to tell me not to be so rigid and fixed in my mindset, because you never know what's going to happen the next day. And you hear that as a young child or as a, adolescent or teenager, but you don't really understand the depth of what something like that means. And so I think it's around just challenging people in a supportive, comfortable, compassionate way to understand, are they still living in accordance with the them then and the them now?
Yeah. What are your views on when people have, and I certainly do this, what are your next 5-year goals, 10-year goals? What does that look like for you? And then you planned, you write out all the great, amazing goals you want to achieve in the next 5 years and 10 years. And like you said, life doesn't always work out that way. Things happen. A lot of things can happen in between.
Yeah. So that was how I lived my life until I became unwell. And I don't think so. I don't have a judgment on it. I think for some people they really work. Yeah. And I think when people are lucky enough to not go through significant challenge, it's great, because without that, they wouldn't be able to, fix on their goal in sight.
Yeah.
But I think when I'm working with somebody, I always say, if this is the way in which you want to work, let's go for it. But we have to hold it in a slack basket, if that makes sense. So, don't put it in a box that's so airtight that there's no room for maneuver, where the molecules inside can't breathe, essentially. Let's hold it in a slack box that's movable and, malleable, should we say, because when pressure is exerted on the outside of that box has room to maneuver and move and change its shape and mold into wherever it needs to go to. So I think 5-year goals, 10-year goals, whatever goals one has, if it works for somebody, I think that's great. And I think it's important to have some sort of structure in one's life. But I think the important aspect of that is practicing self-compassion. Yeah. So being kind about challenges that might arise, recognizing that we need to look at ourselves from a non-judgmental point of view. Well, okay, I was meant to achieve this by the end of December. I haven't done it. You could either be quite negative and self-critical to yourself and punish yourself for not doing what you should have done, or you can look at all the things that you have done instead. You can look at all the things that have brought you joy, have brought you success, reward, whatever it is that your metric is. And elevate that and amplify it, as well as recognizing, actually, that didn't quite get fulfilled. So how am I going to carry that over? So it's around talking to yourself with love, self-compassion, understanding that life isn't a linear path only, and enjoying the journey and not just the destination. Yeah. So I think it's a combination of those things. So having said that, though, I do need to come up with a bit more of a 5-year plan than just meandering through the forest. But yeah, I think it's it's important to work with what is right for you and what sits with you, but also be kind to yourself in the process, which I don't think, again, many women are very kind to themselves. Women who are, going through life transitions, midlife career change and things like that, are very kind to themselves. And speaking from personal experience, South Asian women are not very kind to themselves either. Yeah. So
and then you have the transition of going through the perimenopause and the menopause as well, which
absolutely
adds to it.
And we have these kind of humps in life, actually, as women. So you have your childhood years, and then you have your adolescence, where actually menstruation and puberty and things like that are really quite significant for boys as well, of course. And then you have your early career years. And then you have, if you choose to become a parent, you have parenthood and the significant changes that occur to us when we become mothers. I don't think I was really aware of that. As a doctor, I was aware of the anatomical, of the psychological, of the mental health elements, but putting all of those together and recognizing that we emerge or re-emerge from carrying a child, bringing them safely into the world as a completely different individual, that identity shift that occurs is huge. And I don't think I ever really appreciated it, or I was ever spoken to about it, or it was part of my, PSHE education or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you go through life, being a mother and trying to juggle career and motherhood and all the things that come with it. And then you're going through perimenopause, and then you go through aging, and then you're like, okay, we're constantly going through these life transitions as women. Whereas, some might not have those undulations all the way through their path. So you're constantly trying to navigate who you are and be comfortable with a new you. And that's exhausting.
It is absolutely exhausting. You talk about going through being a parent. It's not something that you're prepared for.
No.
And I certainly wasn't. It wasn't even talked about anyway in our household. It's not a course you go on, how to be a parent, to be honest. And again, when you bring up a child, each child is different. If you have multiple children, each child within that household is different. So you're kind of dealing with multiple personalities in the house as well on top of that.
Whilst you're learning about yourself.
Whilst you're learning out, and figuring out what's going on with you and figuring out what you want to do and figuring out your career, and or perhaps you just want to be at home with your children, which is fine. But there is a lot to unpack there. So how, using your kind of psychology skills, how does one go about taking a step back and really trying to understand and unpack that, and taking a really big, deep breath and moving on from that and having a healthier life? Because let's face it, if you get into a muddle about this, or it's not going to be great for your mental and physical health.
Yeah. So many different ways. Firstly, I like people to understand really what self-compassion is. So it's about Professor Kristen Neff is an amazing researcher, and she is the person who has really brought self-compassion into the academic realm. So of course, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Baha'ism, all of these, really beautiful Eastern religions have spoken about self-compassion for centuries, millennia. This isn't a new concept, but Professor Kristen Neff has offered a lot of research to the world, which has allowed theory to be grounded in more Western societies where evidence-based practices are more welcome, should we say, from my perspective, from my experience. And so self-compassion is essentially around recognizing that we should treat ourselves as we would our best friend. So if you were to come to me and you were to say to me, I've got this problem, this has happened and I feel really rubbish about this, I would be kind to you and I would speak to you with love and I would want to help you and work through it. But when you yourself are going through, an identical event, you don't speak to yourself with that same love, that same compassion and that same softness. That negative critical voice that kind of sits at the back of our head is the one that comes forward first. And so the mainstay of my work is around supporting people in really understanding how to be compassionate with themselves and offering themselves that reflection time. We're so busy living and doing that we're not being. And a lot of the things that we do in society nowadays, because the way it's being constructed, is quite transactional. And what I try and bring back into people's conscious thought is the relational aspect of everything they do. So not just with people, but with your environment, with the world, with your own spirituality, with your goals. So the goals that you made when you were 20 years old, are you still working towards them? And if you are, why? Are your values the same as what they were when you were 20? So it's a lot of work around kind of the deeper meaning and purpose that we have in life. How satisfied are you with the things that you have? So, or the things that you are, should I say. So one of the biggest problems that I had was I wasn't satisfied with my health, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. You can't control your physical health. And then the leakage effect that when you can't, when your physical health isn't optimized, it then leaks into your mental health because you can't do anything about it. And then that leaks into all of the other aspects of who you are. And so I had to do some serious work around, well, who am I? Because the person that I'm trying to be isn't here anymore.
Yeah.
And so I needed to learn about who I was and love that person, and then learn what my now goals are, what my now values are, because they had shaped and morphed immensely. Fundamentally, I'm the same person, of course, but I'm far more able to articulate what's important to me, and shape and change what I'm working towards, and not be afraid to say that, I've decided I'm not going to do that anymore, without seeing that it's a failure. And I think these words are very important in society, and we don't pay much attention to them. You know, failure, success, what do they mean? Perfectionism, criticism, constructive feedback, all of these things we don't really give ourselves the best chance of being compassionate with ourselves, because we hold ourselves against such tough, rigid rules. And I think that's how I really support people in understanding how we can break that down, because we're so complex. As I said, there are hundreds and millions of different pieces of us. Where do you start? You start with, who are you? Who are you now? And what's important to you? And just those few questions can be really life-changing to a person, actually.
That can take some time to unpack.
Absolutely, yeah.
It really can, because if someone asked me, who are you?
Oh, 100%. So these, when I work with people, it's over...
Yeah, of course.
Months, years. And it's important to recognise that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And each conversation that one has, a lot of the work happens in between sessions and not just in the session, because we have that reflective space when we're on our own. And, like you do with anybody, when you have a conversation or interaction with somebody, you start replaying it sometimes, and different parts of that will become more important to you. And that's where the real work is. It's in that self-reflective space. I'm just a person to have a conversation with. The work is done by the individual.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it has to.
Yeah.
I guess once you've kind of discovered who you are and where you're heading and what you want to do, you do need to have the courage to make that change. Because if you're so used to a version of yourself that perhaps isn't your true self, having the courage to change that and step away from, perhaps, let's just take an example, especially, with the South Asian culture, success is a lot of certain professions, doctor or a surgeon or an accountant or a lawyer or the CEO of Google or something like that, right? And if you suddenly realize that is not me, that is not who I want to be anymore. Perhaps there was a time that where I did want that, but it's not me now. How do you step away from that? Because it takes a lot of courage, and a lot of people do face a lot of backlash from that as well.
100%, yeah. And I think, and that's really challenging, and I don't want to minimise that at all. And it's very easy for me to sit here and say these words. It's very, very hard. And for me, and from what I've noticed with the people I work with, the biggest factor that supports people in developing that courage, or at least harnessing and holding on to it, is support networks. So having loved ones around you, having people who love you for you and not for the fact that you're a surgeon or an accountant or whatever it is. And that isn't always possible. I've been very, very fortunate. Lots of people don't have that in their households or in their lives. And so that's where I go back to it again. Self-compassion is really important. Self-love. How do we love ourselves? What is important in life? Your health and your happiness and your ability to do good in the world. Those are the things that are important, or whatever it is that you want to do. And developing courage around that and developing courage around your own identity is a very challenging aspect. And the biggest proponent or the biggest supporter of that is people. So finding your people, finding your tribe, finding people who you can lean on, and they might be outside of your home. Your biggest supporters may not be within your home.
Of course.
But finding people who you can lean on and having the courage to lean on them is hugely important, because actually, as South Asians as well, and again, I'm just speaking from my personal experience, we don't really lean on people. We don't really say, oh, do you know what, I need you, Shreya. Like, I really need your support here. Because there's some sort of failure that's wrapped up in that you're not strong enough or you're not able enough. And that we should have all of our resources within us individually. And that's not possible because nobody's perfect. You know, we're all human. We are all fallible, and we all have imperfections. And so leaning on somebody else because they might have something that you need, asking for their support actually is a very liberating place to be. And when you find that you can do that, when you start small incrementally, and you try and find a way of connecting with people, you can start taking bigger risks, and you can start doing more and more. It's like climbing a mountain. You can't just get to the top. You have to train, you have to understand, you have to learn the landscape, you have to develop skills, and then slowly you start to take your steps up the mountain. And it takes time.
And then you acclimatise at each stage as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so you need these points of reflection. You need these points where you can just stop and turn around and look at how far you've come. Enjoy that moment, and then move on. And I think for whatever reason, historically, structurally, culturally, everything has to be very fast paced. And it's about recognizing that in our lives, there is actually space for us to stop and reflect, but we have to make it. We do have to make it. And I'm guilty of that. I will say quite often, I don't have time to do this, I don't have time to do that. But when it comes to yourself, you do have to, because otherwise all of your relationships at some point will bear some consequence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What about defining success? Because I think that's a hard one. I feel like a lot of success is put onto us, when it comes to money. And again, if you think your success is making millions, as an example, that is your success. But saying that sounds a bit not right, you know, and people shy away from saying that as well. So really trying to define what your success is when there's so much outside influence coming in at all angles as well. That's really difficult.
It is really difficult, and it's like wearing a coat that doesn't fit, or wearing a coat that's got a label at the back that's a bit itchy, and you've just constantly got that itch there that you just can't get rid of. It's so for me, I had to do a lot of work around unpacking this word of success, because as a coach, it's important to be coached as well. And as a coach, it's important to kind of do self-reflective exercises. Otherwise, you can't help others if you're not, practiced in that yourself. And I thought success was being a full-time working mum who was able to, go to work, manage everything, spin loads of plates, take her kids to all of these different clubs or whatever they needed to do, and be able to socialize fully at the weekends and just basically do everything at 100 miles an hour. And when I became unwell, I couldn't do any of that. So in my mind, I was a very unsuccessful person, because none of that could hold true. And then I started to ask myself, well, why is this my definition of success? Why and how has that happened? And I realized that hadn't come from my parents. It hadn't come from my sister. It hadn't come from anything. It had come from me. It sounds really silly, watching TV, reading books, external influences that weren't my makeup and had not come from my own conscience and consciousness. And so I started to redefine what it was. And I had a lot of backlash, actually, when I decided to study positive psychology. I had so many people in medicine, not my family, say, what do you want to do that for? What can you do with that? And my answer was, I can learn, and I'm just so excited by all that I can learn from this new subject. And they're like, but what are you going to do with it? And actually, I didn't have an answer. And I said, I don't know. And for them, because they obviously, maybe their definitions were you only do something to get somewhere. It was a very, very alien concept to them. But for me, I found it really liberating. When I went to university for the first time, I studied maths. And maths is a subject which is based on absolute truths.
Yeah.
There is no here or there. It is binary. This is the truth, and that's an absolute. I then studied medicine, and it's not an absolute truth, but it's kind of 50-50 here or there. You know, it's a science and an art. You know, there are gold standard ways of doing things. It's mainly about pattern recognition. And so, you know, it was a little bit removed from maths, but not so much. And then I studied psychology, and I was like, oh my God, I can think what I want to think. I'm not being told how to think. I'm not being told what to think. There is no right answer. You know, that there are loads of different paths that you can take. And I have to say, I found that the most liberating. And it was only then that I understood what my definition of success was. And for me, it's being a free thinker.
Sounds like everyone, if you want to study psychology. Oh,
absolutely,
first.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a funny one, and it's something that we do really need to analyze and pull apart. Where does this definition come from, and why, and by whom, and what does it mean to you? So for me, I felt that if I wasn't succeeding in particular ways, I might not be loved, but that was completely from me and nowhere else. And you recognize that you have all these assumptions and judgments about life that aren't true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when I wasn't very well, people still loved me the same. People still behaved with me the same way, because it was me that they loved, not the person that I had been. And I think it's really important to just keep having periods of reflective space in your life. You can't do it every day. You don't want to do it every day, but maybe every 6 months or so, have a 40-minute, 50-minute block in your diary where you can just think about things. How are things going? Am I doing what I want to be doing? Am I happy? If I'm not happy, where is the gap, and how can I fill it?
Absolutely. I think habits is another problem people face as well. And I say as a problem because people have this one thing that they want to do, or multiple things they want to do. And often it takes habits to get to that stage. And then those habits fall apart and people kick themselves and they don't succeed in whatever it is. So how, using your experience with psychology, how can people really transform the way they do things so that things do become more habitual and they can get to that goal or that task, whatever it is that they want to do, whether it's, you know, change their health goals and be more healthy, eat better, move better, sleep better, whatever.
Yeah. So for that's multifactorial, I would say. So the first thing I would say is time. Trying to do things at the same time every day is a really great way of it becoming kind of almost like a knee-jerk type of behavior. So, you know, you get up in the morning, the first thing you do is go to the bathroom and you brush your teeth. You do that now without thinking. Like, you get out of bed, you roll out of bed, and you automatically just walk towards the bathroom, and that happens without you really thinking about it. And you're half asleep, but you're looking at yourself in the mirror with your toothbrush in your mouth, brushing your teeth. So trying to do something that is at the same time every day can be really helpful. So time is one. Space is another. Trying to modify one's environment to allow for this habit to take place. So, I don't know, say you wanted to have, a glass of fresh juice every morning because you've read something about the vitamins and you want to increase your vitamin count. You know, preparing a space for it. So making a space on your counter for, I don't know, the glass or something, or making it look pretty or nice, but changing the environment around supporting the practice of this habit is really helpful, because again, it's connecting you not just with the act of drinking a glass, but with the environment around which the glass is sitting. Does that make sense? So actually there's more of a visual stimulus to it as well. There's visual stimulus to it, and there is the opportunity for you to make a physical space in your life for this habit. So space is a second thing. The third thing I would say is making sure that your goal is small. So you can always increase the number of goals that you have, and the destination can always keep changing. But if your goal is too big and too far away, it's not going to be manageable. So you need to make sure that it's chunkable, small, and close to home. So what I mean by that is it will be easy to achieve. So, okay, I want to make sure that I have a glass of this juice every day for the rest of my life. Okay, great. So how am I going to support that? I'm going to do it once a week at first. I'm going to make sure that once a week I have this, and I'm going to tick it off on my calendar or my diary. So again, I've got a visual stimulus that's proving to me that I have done this. Okay, great. I've done it for a week. I've done it for 2 weeks. Now I'm going to increase it. So I do it 3 times a week for 3 weeks. Great. Okay. And so this goes on and on and on. And then the more you start to do this, the easier it is to plan those 5 minutes where you're making your juice, and then you have it, and then it just becomes far more of a routine driven thing. And then before you know it, after 90 days of doing it, suddenly it becomes something that is absolutely alien if you don't do it.
Yeah. Do you think people might think, that's just too slow, I want everything now?
Yeah, I do.
And it's just too much of a slow progress. I would just want to go 5 days a week all out. And
we live in a society where we're run by dopamine, essentially. So we're so used to having everything at the touch of our fingers. You've got Amazon Prime, you've got Deliveroo, you've got Netflix, Prime, whatever it is, we have it when we want it. I don't know the answer to something. Okay, I'm just going to chat GPT it. I've got Spanish day at school tomorrow, I need to wear a red t-shirt. Okay, let me Amazon Prime it. All these silly things. We're just so used to modern convenience of everything happening now. And I go back to kind of my childhood, where I think we had programs, like going back to TV, programs on a Saturday morning, and I'd have to wait a whole week to watch the next episode of my program or whatever it was. And that actually was a very good way of learning patience. And of learning that you have to wait for things, and it's important to just know how to do other things. I think we get so fixated on we want to get to our goal, we want to get there very quickly, that we don't have the patience to understand that all good things do take time. And I think it's a problem with modern society, to be honest. And how can we bring that back? It's by noticing it and by putting those artificial barriers in ourselves, so that we're actually training ourselves to have a gap between the stimulus and the response, and understand how to sit in the stillness.
And I think it's great to have someone that you're accountable to as well. Because otherwise, when you're doing your coaching, as an example, if you're coaching me, I know that next week you're going to be there, or however often I speak to you, to kind of hold me to account, to see, well, did you do that? And how did you do it? And if not, obviously the compassionate side has to come out, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the connection with other people comes in, that connectivity. So we have different connections for different reasons. And whether you have somebody who's an accountability partner, or somebody who, you're just checking in on, or if you're going through things at the same time as well, I said to my sister I wanted to do 10,000 steps a day, and she said I will as well. So then we both do it together. She does it independently, I do it independently. But at the end of the day, you're like, oh, did you do it? Or no, I didn't. I'll carry it over to tomorrow. Okay, make sure you do and tell me. So having that accountability partner is really, really helpful as well. And so I think making habits, you need to really recognize that you need time, space, a change of environment, self-compassion, and kind of almost a visual stimulus, as well as an accountability partner.
Yeah. You mentioned that you also help organizations to make this change. How do you do that with organizations? Because dealing with an individual on a very personal level compared to a whole organization, they're completely, I'm assuming they're very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it comes down to kind of strategy formation in terms of wellbeing programs, how you're going to be changing the language that people use. So working with a lot of HR departments, because obviously HR are responsible for the people and the bodies within the organisation. And when you're supporting them to change their language and their understanding, that's going to filter down. So it's working with people through education programs, essentially, so that you're changing the landscape of their understanding. And then with knowledge comes power, and with knowledge comes behaviour change. And so it's more of a slow burner rather than quick fixes. So I work with people to support behaviour change, essentially. I do a lot of group coaching. So group coaching is a fantastic tool as well to support people to understand one another. And so group coaching is very different to team coaching. So team coaching is when you're working with people who work together already, and you might be working through either particular team dynamics or project problems or something to do with that group of people. Group coaching is when you have individuals who might not know each other, but they come together around a shared concept. So a lot of the group coaching I do is return to work, for example. So you've had a period of sickness and you're coming back to work. So a lot of the themes and the patterns are united. Coming to work after maternity leave or things like that. So a lot of organisations are buying into these wellbeing packages around group coaching and educational services, because that's how you're going to get the most long-term change and sustained growth. Again, rather than using a plaster, you're looking at the systematic problem, the systemic problem, and how we can change growth around that.
I think that can be quite a game changer for companies.
Absolutely.
Definitely. What last words would you say to someone who's kind of going through a transition, and perhaps even encouraging people to really take a step back? Because we all say, I don't have the time, but you can perhaps take that one day off work and do a bit of reflection. So what would you advise if someone was to take that time off, whatever that time frame is? What steps should they take to really kind of discover where they're at and what they're doing and where they're heading?
I would suggest that they get themselves a big pad of paper and a pen. So like a notebook where they can doodle, they can write streams of consciousness, whatever it is, but write a list of 3 things, just 3 things that they want to change or achieve, or goals, whatever it is. I want to give myself more time. I want to learn more about myself. I want to get a coach, whatever it is. But actually writing those things down allows your subconscious mind to bring your thoughts into your conscious mind. And when things are in our conscious mind, we're more likely to do something about it. Because it's not something that's bumbling away on the surface. And, we have so many ruminations and thoughts and reflections that are going on in our head, and being able to actually actively do something about a challenge that we're facing is very, very hard unless we know what challenge we're facing. And when you see those words on the paper, you might be like, well, no, that's not what it is. I don't want to do that. That isn't it. And then something else might come out later. But the first time you're wanting to make that active change, you need to give yourself time and space. And the biggest part of that, I would say, is be comfortable, or learn how to be comfortable in the discomfort, because it's not an easy process. And actually figuring out what areas of your life you want to reflect on, look at, analyze, change, support, grow, challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. And so giving yourself that space to be comfortable, knowing that it will be uncomfortable, is the biggest hurdle, I would say. So I think definitely having a big pad of paper, a jotter, and just writing things down in a way that you yourself can make some head or tail of it. And then working through those steps, whichever ones manifest and whichever ones become more important to you, I think is the way forward.
That's great. Thank you so much. Amrita, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your journey, and also sharing some fantastic insights. And I hope people can take away lots of things from the conversation and really take a step back. I think it's so important that people really do take a step back and assess their life, really, and what they're doing with it.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray, for having me.